I invite you in your Chumashim to turn to chapter 19 of Leviticus, verse 17 and then 18. That'll be found in Parshat Kedoshim on page 696. On this Shabbat shuvah, when I walk to shul, I've shared this many times, but my beloved Talmud teacher from then the University of Judaism, Eliezer Slomovic, comes to mind. Eliezer was one of the most learned teachers I was privileged to have, and one of the most humble. And I see Ahuva knew him, and she's nodding her head in agreement. He was a sweet, sweet man. He, Eliezer Slomovic, was first cousins with Elie Wiesel, and they were named for the same grandfather. And Eliezer Slomovic grew up not in Sigid, but there's a river, and then on the other side is a town called Slatvina, on the Czech side. Just across the way, they could wave to each other. And he said that in his shtibel in Slatvina, the rabbi only spoke 3 times a year. He spoke before Pesach, and there were only 2 people who understood what he was saying, because it was Jewish law on such a sophisticated level that no one could really follow the detail. Then once a year he talked about ritual purity, how women needed to go to the ritual bath on a monthly basis, and he did that with such embarrassment that he kind of whispered and no one could hear him. And then Shabbat shuvah, this Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, he got up and began to cry, because it's the Shabbat in which you ask for forgiveness. And he would ask for forgiveness, and amidst his tears you couldn't understand what he was saying. He said those in Slatvina, those were the only 3 times a year the rabbi spoke on Shabbat morning, and each were similar in that regard. So Shabbat shuvah is the morning before Yom Kippur, in which as a community we turn to ask, how could we shuv? How could we return? How could we be before God more faithful and more faithful to our authentic self? So I've invited us to turn to page 696. Actually, 696 for verse 17. There's a lot that's on the cutting floor, sort of speaking, when I prepare for high holidays. And my research all summer has been on the verse 19, Ohev re'echa kamocha, you should love your neighbors yourself. So if you look at that famous line, it's in verse 18. Va'ahavta l're'acha kamocha, you should love your neighbor as yourself. Ani Adonai, I am the ever-present one. Rabbi Akiva, the great rabbi of Israel of the 1st and 2nd century, said of this phrase, Klal Gadol b'Torah. It's the great principle of Torah. Right before it, in verse 18, it says, you shall not take vengeance nor bear a grudge against one of your fellow peoples. But that verse 18, is part of a couplet. And the way you know it's a couplet, if you kind of go backwards, they all end with Ani Adonai, I am the Lord your God, and it's every 2 verses ends Ani Adonai, and they seem to go together. So verse 17 goes with verse 18. Lo tisna et achicha bil vavecha, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. Hocheach tochiach et amitecha, you shall surely reprove those of your people. V'lo tisa alav chet, lest you carry upon you a sin. So, as is the nature, everything requires interpretation. But the thing to know is that these 2 famous lines are actually coupled together. Hochiach Hocheach tochiach et amitecha. You shall surely reprove. You shall surely tell somebody what they're doing wrong. And ahavta l'recha kamocha, and you should love your neighbor as yourself. So on Shabbat shuvah, we have a responsibility to reprove. Not just Shabbat shuvah, at all times. I've read a lot of commentaries. I could keep talking, but I'm going to just pause. What do you think? How would you apply this command? Hocheach tochiach et amitecha. And how does it link to loving your neighbor? How does reproof link to love? Any thoughts? Neil? And the key word that the rabbis use is this concept of fester, that unless you're able to articulate what it is that's bothering you and to feel heard, then it festers. And in that sense, it becomes unhealthy. The relationship can become unhealthy. Is that a good reframing? Patricia? So Patricia says, first with a child, by not disciplining and setting limits for a child, you are not displaying love. Love means to give guidance. And that means to educate a child as to where there are limits. Likewise with people, even who are not your children, to be able to let them know where they are in need of character repair is a gift. We have something called the Musar tradition, the tradition of learning how to behave more with character. And in the Musar tradition, which was largely within the Misnagdish yeshiva world of the 19th century, you were assigned a chavruta, a study partner, just for character development. And you were to develop a trust with each other where you were to be the mirror of how you each could improve. That takes it to the next level of a quality of openness. Take one more and then I'm going to share a line from Proverbs. Howard? All well taken and providing a great bridge. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, said, the things that most bother us about other people bother us precisely because they are part of our shadow. They're part of what we're repressing about ourselves. Meaning, there's a lot of things that are worthy of being bothered by, but the ones that really grab us, so he said they're really part of ourselves that we're not wanting to look at. That's one piece. And here's another rabbinic commentary to Howard's insight. When it says, reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him, Rashi, the great French commentator, adds, incur no guilt because of him, meaning do not embarrass him. So if you reprove a person so as to cause embarrassment to that person, that's what this is referring to. Reprove, but don't do it in such a way that causes embarrassment. Some would say, building on that you gotta speak to another person out of compassion and love and not anger. And if you allow it to stew, then it turns sometimes more emotional than you might have intended it to be. So address it privately, and do it lovingly, lest you cause sin by how you reprove. To embarrass is to engage in a sin. And Rashi, again, emphasizes that in his commentary. So that's also a segue to the following teaching from Proverbs. I was thinking of making this. It's not going to be a high holiday sermon, I don't think, but I had thought about it as a challenge. Here is chapter 9 of Proverbs of Mishlei, verses 8 and 9. It says as follows: Al tochachletz pein yisna echa. Do not chastise a scoffer, lest he hates you. Hochach lechacham. If you chastise a wise person, v'yehaveka, he will love you. So that is to say, if you chastise somebody who's not prepared to hear it, they're only going to resent it. If you chastise a person who's wise, who sees value in having a mirror held up, they will value you for giving you that criticism. Where I was thinking, though, again, it's on the cutting floor, is challenging the congregation between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I do it now on Shabbat shuvah, to be open to being criticized. Not those kind of criticisms that are the nagging criticisms, but one person, back to the Musar tradition, to whom you say, tell me just one character flaw, one quality of my behavior that's often reflexive, that you think is worthy of consideration, that I should look at. Just one. Can't do one thing at a time. But I think that if that was a way of responding to being a chacham, not a letz. A letz is a scoffer, but it's also to be letz is to be lazy. To be lazy means not wanting to examine or change. Mi chacham, Pirkei Avot says, who is wise? Hu mishalom made mikol adam, a person who learns from every person. Chacham is the ability to always be open to learning and the capacity to be chastised. To accept a chastisement is only part of being a chacham. Most of us, most of the time, are not so chacham. Most people reflexively see a challenge of consider what you said as criticism rather than worthy of hearing to correct. In the extreme, and most of us are not that extreme, the extreme can never admit wrong, ever. Will rewrite what really took place, really circle, because it can never admit a mistake in the extreme. And any challenge is seen as an attack. And an attack is worthy of attacking back. That's a letz. And that's a strong word of somebody who is so lazy that they're unwilling to grow and change. And so, hocher tochiach et amitecha, you shall surely chastise your neighbor, is artful. It goes with love. Love is artful too. How to love is art, which is why I hope you do participate in the small groups. Because talking about what it means to love is to become more reflective rather than reflexive in how one opens one's heart and extends oneself in care. And so, on this Shabbat shuvah, we are called to be wise. In this regard, we're called on to be wise not only in how we share, but even more how we allow ourselves to hear one way from perhaps just one person between now and Yom Kippur, how indeed we can shuv, return to God's presence to be more fully ourselves. Ribbon Shalom, Master of the universe, on this Shabbat shuvah, may we learn to love our neighbor as ourselves. For there's a commentary that is as such, Kamocha ani Adonai. For as you act, so I will be God. May we learn to act in divine ways. Amen.